We are in Algiers Point, Louisiana, with Jon Racherbaumer. Hi, John.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. So, as far as I know, my research has shown me that you started corresponding with Marlo in 1967, and it went from there. You want to?
Actually, I don't really want to correct you because you did find one of the early letters, but the first letter that I ever wrote to Marlo was in 1966. And it was typewritten, and I wrote him because I had read in the New Tops a trick that knocked me out. I'm talking specifically about a Pharaoh trick that you and I both know called mental topper. And I wanted to, or at least I hoped, that I would get some kind of reply, because at the same time I wrote two other letters. I wrote one to Vernon, and I wrote one to Charlie Miller. And both, they were all more or less fan letters. I never heard a peep from Vernon or Charlie Miller, but to my astonishment, in less than a week, I got a complete answer from Marlo. Not only did he answer my letter, but he sent me some further ideas and opened up the possibility of actually corresponding. And subsequently, there were many letters. I probably wrote one letter to him every 10 days. Wow. And it was also because of that correspondence, if I came across something that I was playing around with, and at that time, Joe Finishell, I think was his last name, put out a gimmick card called the acrobatic card. And it was only like $1.50, and I ordered it from Tannen's, and I was playing with it because it was one of those playful gimmicks with the rubber dam fold on it. And I thought, well, maybe there's other things to do, because he just had this thing where it was under a silk or on top of the deck, and it suddenly flipped over and turned face up. And so I sent those to Marlo, and then Marlo came up with three things. And then it became, before it became a booklet, it was a series of 5 or 6 pages with applications to this that Magic Ink wanted to sell. So that's a long answer to what you just said, my start of corresponding. And I corresponded with him for almost 2 years before I ever met him. And this is typical about in the day before there was Skype and the internet, and even the telephone was too expensive. The only way you could communicate with other magicians that didn't live in your hometown was by letter. I wrote to Stephen Minch maybe over 11 years before I ever met him. And the only way you're going to eventually meet him is if you start going to conventions.
Yeah, we started talking. It was 6 years before we actually met.
Right, and you started because you were of the generation where you say, well, I got a telephone.
Yeah, this was pre-internet.
Yeah,
and
if you can find it. And there's something a little bit more robust about writing letters and talking on the telephone rather than putting something in a tweet or on an email or even on YouTube.
Right.
I mean, the thing that probably makes the most sense on YouTube is if they actually do a trick that's, and you can't do something that's 2 hours. I guess you can, but most of the stuff is one trick or one move. Most of the time it's color changes and vanishes and eye candy stuff. They don't do routines.
It's interesting how probably the most popular color change that you see in the movies and on YouTube and in different clips is Marlo's snap change. It's seems to be the one that you see the most,
And that started out really as a Horace Golden change.
Yeah.
which I put in the Card Finesse 2, and nobody did that because it wasn't right at the fingertips. It had a strange grip to it, and then when you did it, you were kind of dirty. You could lean back and lap it, but it wasn't something that you could do 360 or anything like that. So
yeah.
And his was it just looked like it was just held by a thumb and a finger and a snap, and then he had a nice cleanup.
Right.
So you could do it. And then everybody did it. That's typical of Marlo. You know, they say, well, he didn't invent that, but he certainly popularized it. And that's, you know, on and on.
Right.
You know, I could ask you a question. If you were interviewing me, sometimes in an interview situation, the person that's being interviewed will ask the person who is initially to, you know, direct the questioning, because everyone has a different perspective. You started getting involved with Marlo, and this podcast is about Marlo. What would you say, and this will catch you somewhat off guard, is what does Marlo's rarely get credit for? What was it about Marlo's material that you saw that was dramatically different from anything you read before? And I'll answer too.
Well, I think, and I say this a lot, and in fact I talked about it briefly in the last podcast, is that there was this immediacy to his effects. And you've said this before, you know, as complex as some of his methodologies might have been, when you look at the overall procedure and you know, the delivery of the procedure, it was very clear, very direct, and the effect came out of left field sometimes. And if you examine other tricks by other people, there's this sort of milling around. They don't seem to understand how to construct a trick that has real sudden impact.
Well, when I hear you say the immediacy, that was always the startling thing. If somebody saw Marlo do one of his routines or sleights, it didn't take much time. It occurred within a short period of time, and it had that visual impact. And then you said, okay, let me see the write-up. And then you see the write-up, and it was like 10 pages. And then you say, oh, why is it 10 pages? Well, maybe 3 pages describes the actual physical steps that you have to take. Right. The explanation there. Then, at the same time, usually, when he gets off into digressions of why this is so. Why did you do it that way? What was the result here? And then he would go back to that, and before you know it, you've got all of this other explanation. And, well, Jay Marshall used to say all the Marlo books or magazines that he read put him to sleep. And he, you know, I said, well, that's because you weren't interested in that. You know, you were interested in what's the effect. And the importance of Marlo is in the details. Not only the devil of the details, but it's all there. I thought that the thing that many magicians, if not most of them, never credited Marlo for his ability to objectively assess his own stuff. He not only assessed it intrinsically, which was the method and the trick itself, but extrinsically, which means what are all the other things outside of the method? Well, the other things are time, place, where are you doing this, kinds of layman, right. And more importantly, where will this thing appear on the creative continuum? How does it rank with everything that went before? And how do you speculate its position in the future? I had 2 words that I I rarely ever put him in print, but it was a characteristic of Marlo. I called him, he had oracular foresight. Oracular, as in oracle. And, you know, that's the kind of pronouncements that come from somebody that's an expert who knows what they're speaking of. And he knew enough about everything because he read everything. He read most of the books that came out. And that was always his starting point when he wanted to fix or finesse something. It was something that he read. And he read these things, and then he was looking for what's missing, what might be good about this trick, and what is its weaknesses, and what is its potential that hasn't been fully developed. You know, even as, although he wasn't the first person to said it, Vernon said we stopped thinking too soon. Marlo never stopped thinking about it. He not only didn't stop thinking too soon, after he fixed and finessed something, he still say, you know, I'll come back to that and think about it. Because he was never satisfied. He imagined that there was, and I guess we all do, that there's an omega point of which you're going to eventually work your way through and get to it. And still it's not perfect. You'll say, you know what? At this point, it's good enough. Right. And he doesn't get credit for that.
Right. Well, he does now.
Yeah.
So after,
What a segue.
yeah, that was great. After, I don't want to go too far afield into your later work with Marlo, like, I mean, I say later, even into the Hierophant and Kabbalah and Sticks and Stones and all those magazines that you did. But after
Which are 40 years ago already.
yeah, after getting connected with Marlo with that initial routine, you then started looking back on all the other stuff. I mean, the earlier Marlo stuff as well. I mean, you guys were innovating and producing and publishing stuff that would endure for decades. But there was that earlier material. What was your relationship to
The hardest
that?
part of people now that read the books, they don't think in the context, and it's not easy to do. All they want to know is what's the trick, what's the steps. They don't care about the historical context at all. And when I started reading Marlo in 1963, 64, now I'm going back to read a book that he put out, like Marlo and Spades, in 1946. A lot of time, and then I'm going back. What other books were out in 1946? And you start reading the old ones, whether it's Encyclopedia of Card Tricks, or you read Card Control in 1940, or you read Expert Card Technique, and the Inner Secret series of Vernon wasn't even out yet. So you look at that, and then you say, what did people think when Marlo and Spades came out in 46? Well, I can tell you, reading the review by, I think it was Gene Hugert, who was considered one of the elder statesmen, he called it a dream book. He read some of those things, and he says, well, you know what? He's making it up. Nobody was doing anything with the Pharaoh Shuffle. So he said this is not only impractical, it's not doable.
And this is the guy that had a whole section on the Pharaoh Shuffle in his book.
Absolutely. And I didn't know what the Pharaoh is, and I'm looking at all of the stuff in there, and I thought, well, I didn't think it was not doable, but I thought, how amazing that this was happening right after World War II. Right. And then you go back and you say, is that stuff still good? So 1946 to 2016, it's amazing amount of stuff that still is timeless. So my guess is Marlo had a sense of this. He said, and you could always tell if he had a conversation, he says, when he said, you know, that's good, that was almost like an imprimatur on it that you say, you know what, that's still going to be good. And that's what we talk about as if you give it the status of a classic.
Right.
A classic is something that it's immune to the passage of time. And so our job is to figure out what are the properties of stuff that's a classic that endures. We were gonna, I think the trick that you told me you were gonna at least demonstrate in the visual sense really dates back to 1945. Well, guess what? That's 70 years ago. And when I perform that, I would even perform it today. And if a person, including a well-posted magician, is unfamiliar with this, they're going to be at least puzzled. And layman, it still goes with layman. It's not just a trick for insiders. And that was 1945. Came out as part of the Miracle series. He was a friend with Laurie Ireland, and Laurie would say, "Ed, you got something I can sell?" He said, "Yeah, well, how about selling this?" So they would type it up and mimeograph it. It'd be just a few, pages, and it said, yeah, 50 cents. And Double Trouble sold for 50 cents. Now, I have no idea how many they sold. It was reviewed. I was able to go back through the published record. John Braun gave it a nice review, one review, said it's certainly a bargain. And later on, if you look at, ring reports and assembly reports, did anybody start performing this? And guess what? 2 years later, 1947, somebody else puts it in print. Marlo's name isn't mentioned. They didn't give credit. Now they said, well, maybe somebody showed it to me, and it appeared in print. And then a year later, another guy put it in print as a variation of the guy that expropriated it from Marlo. And then it sort of died on the vine. And later on, it was in Ibidem, I think 34, 35 issue of Ibidem. Our friend Roy Walton liked the idea underlying this trick and put it out. And I put one in the New Tops, I think in 1990, called Redouble Trouble. And it's sort of there. It's one of those things that until somebody shows it again, like you're going to do in this podcast, then they'll always say, well, I didn't know that existed. That's a good thing. And who knows, somebody would say, you know what, I think there's something else that you can do with it.
Right. Which is the point.
All right. We are now going to have some cards selected. You shuffle cards, Lisa?
Yes.
Shuffle them out. D'Artagnan, I know you can shuffle. I knew you could shuffle too. Now, I'm going to turn my back and I want you to spread the cards and take one out. Note it, show it to the camera so they can play along. Turn that card face up and put it into your hand. So that now, when I turn around, I'll be able to find those cards because they are reversed. Not a good trick, so we're going to take it to the next level. Lisa, turn your cards face up and drop them face up on top of D'Artagnan's cards. And D'Artagnan, before I even give you the instructions to shuffle, you're going to shuffle the cards. That's how good D'Artagnan is. Lisa, would you like to shuffle to make this even more impossible? We'll pretend this is 3 a.m. at a convention somewhere in Wichita, Kansas. Now, this is a challenge. Cards face up and face down. But when I snap my fingers, they all turn over. Okay, we're going to have to look through these. Using the tenets of the sevenfold path of Aram. Sing along with me. I will fathom your cards. This is amazing. This is the fun part. Concentrate, concentrate. I'm getting nothing. Concentrate. Ah. It has spoken to me. What card did you choose?
Ace of clubs.
Ah. 2 of clubs. Hey-o! Bingo. And this is this ending is interesting because you repeat the trick. And this is what he does. He's got to turn the cards over. But look, he uses the slop shuffle handling as Jon talked about. And this gives a even further impression of those cards being mixed. And now you put that in there, and you're ready to go. So that's a beautiful way to clean up, which adds to the seemingly randomness of the mixture. And so that is double trouble.